Hey, it's Matthew Cudmore, and welcome to Story Behind the Stone. Today, we're joined by Steve Topham from Wounded Warriors Canada, who shares how the battlefield bike ride is helping veterans and first responders reconnect, reflect, and heal. If you've ever wanted to understand how remembrance can be a gateway to recovery, this episode is packed with powerful stories and insights. Steve, thank you for everything you're doing for veterans, for active commemoration, and for joining us today. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in.
Welcome to the show where we talk service, sacrifice, and stories, connecting you with the past and the most interesting people in the field of veteran causes and commemorations. Today, we're talking with Steve with Wounded Warriors Canada. Steve, thanks so much for being here and welcome to the show.
It's a privilege. Thank you for having me.
We've had the privilege to actually work with you and do some projects with you. Why don't you just quickly tell us a little bit about who you are and what Wounded Warriors Canada is?
Certainly. I have the privilege of acting as the Director of Fundraising and Events for Wounded Warriors Canada, and I've been in this role for the last 8 years. And what it really allows me to do is have the privilege of meeting so many of the incredible men and women who served our country, but also the incredible men and women in the community that are actively supporting our veterans, first responders, and their families through their roles in our fundraising events, one of which is why I am in this position, and one of the events that we're going to really kind of focus on today, which is the battlefield bike ride.
As a former serving member, I never deployed overseas, but I had a lot of friends who did. I've spent a lot of my career working in mental health, addictions, men's mental health, anger management, and such like that as well. And I think what Wounded Warriors is doing for soldiers, but even extending out into, police, fire, nursing, doctors, anybody who's in that line of service, I think it's fundamentally important, the work Wounded Warriors is doing and shedding light and supporting these individuals. And just thank you for the work you guys are doing every day.
It really is a privilege to be in the role and the position that we are as an organization, to be able to support those trauma-exposed professionals across our country. Again, as you've mentioned, whether they be veteran, first responder, border services, corrections, we're there for that community and their family members to support them through their recovery and journey of transition, oftentimes out of the life of service and then into the civilian world.
I was really, really happy to see the work you're doing going just beyond soldiers and into things like EMS and policing and stuff, because it's so important, because that word you use is trauma exposed. The other thing, though, you said is, families, and families are often forgotten. And this kind of leads into a little bit of why we have you here today and how Matthew Stewart on the call got to join you on one of your battlefield bike tours. Do you want to just explain to everybody a little bit about what the battlefield bike tour is and even how you got involved with that?
I'm where I am today because I just happened to run across an ad for the battlefield bike ride that was taking place in 2015, which just so happens to be a return visit for us this year, which is the liberation of the Netherlands and the 80th anniversary. What I found when I was there as a donor and a fundraiser and participant was that the majority of the individuals that were on the ride were still actively serving or had previously served and were raising funds for programs to support their brothers and sisters in service. And as a civilian, I just knew that I could do more and we could do better as a country to support those that have sacrificed so much for us. And it also didn't hurt that General Dallaire was going to be in attendance as well, who was a bit of a hero for me. And as you mentioned, the fact that we support families as well, that was one of the kind of deciding factors for him to join us as our national patron, was because he has really emphasized with us that no individual serves alone, that the family as well serves with that individual, whether they are actually in the field or still at home, they are with their loved ones. And what the battlefield bike ride has allowed us to do is bring these communities together and retrace boots on the ground, whether that be First World War, Second World War, or even as recent as we had the privilege of revisiting the Balkan conflict. And what happened on that ride was we actually had 30 reservists that were actually on the ground during that conflict, which many Canadians were really unaware of the traumatic impact and the extreme fight that they were actually in at that time. So that was just an incredible experience. And, and that's what I found on that first ride was that sense of community and camaraderie. And, I think Matthew can even speak to this, his own experiences, having been able to join us last year on the ride, is that I'm sure he met a lot of people that he's still in contact today with, that he would consider friends, or even in some cases family. So that is really what we build through the Battlefield Bike Ride is really a focused, commitment to honoring the fallen and helping the living through, visiting the memorials along the route, stressing and sharing the historical significance of why we're there, with the riders in attendance.
Like you said, I got to meet several people during the bike ride during the week that we spent in France last year for D-Day 80. Some really amazing people, and I got to learn a few of their stories and what brought them there and the impact that Wounded Warriors has made in their life. Each year you get to meet a new cast of characters and new individuals, and I was wondering if maybe there's a story that you've heard over the years from any participants that maybe you could share that maybe solidified the purpose and the reason for Wounded Warriors doing what they're doing.
I would struggle to find one story or one example because, as you stated, there are so many. If I were to reflect on any one story, it might be, it might be an experience that we had on that 2015 ride in the significance of Canadian military history in other parts of the world and the sacrifice. It was during that 2015 ride when we were just kind of sitting in the market in Bruges, and we were just having a conversation at one of the tables, and a gentleman turned around, looked, and saw that we had maple leafs on our jackets and asked us if we were Canadian. We said yes, and he just out of the blue said, "Well, Canada liberated Bruges on my birthday." And so for all of us in attendance there, that really, that really struck a nerve with us, or just really resonated strongly with us that, gentleman isn't Canadian, but he recognizes it, and he actually thanked us, and we ended up with a round on our table, in gratitude. So I think that's one of the things that I took away from it, and I believe that everyone does, is the significance of the people and the communities that we visit when we're on these rides, and how grateful and thankful they are for Canada's impact and, support during that time.
I found it quite touching when we were, again, on the Battlefield Bike Ride for D-Day 80. I was with a couple of the other riders. We were approached after the ride when we were going out for dinner, and some local French individuals just, they found out that we were North American. For the listeners, I'm American, despite working for a Canadian company. They expressed their appreciation just that we were there, just supporting and remembering, because for them, it's been passed down, I think, quite importantly. It's like cherished memories over the generations, and friendships, bonds that have been built over the years because of the liberation of the countries performed by the Canadians and the Americans occasionally too.
I do think when it comes to trauma and healing, one of the most important things we can do from a commemorative place is to witness, is just to remember, to look at that. And I think that's an instrumental piece. And you must have a lot of family members that are joining you on these tours, following in the footsteps of their ancestors in a way. And that, I think it's probably a humbling experience to be going in those footsteps on these tours.
Oh, it definitely is. And to hear, those stories, and in many cases, these individuals didn't learn about their ancestral military achievements, because it just wasn't talked about. So, it's through these opportunities to do a little bit of digging, those that are going on the rides and looking to see if they have any family members that may be, you know, in any of the cemeteries that we visit or have their name on the memorial, Menin Gate or at Tynecott. They're looking to see where that familial history leads. And they're uncovering stories, which is something that Memory Anchor was able to allow us to do last year, was really look at some of those history pieces or historic stories about the individuals. And I know that Matthew has, a story of one of the individuals that was on the ride last year who found a relative and shared his story. It was very impactful. And the fact that, we were able to be there with him to share in that opportunity was, why we do what we do. And the ride has been so successful because as much as it allows, the individual to see that piece of history and revisit that story, it's the support that they receive and the camaraderie of the individuals that are there with them that, really truly make our event something special.
You probably had many veterans who don't have family, but served in Afghanistan and different theaters and are joining you on this. What is your take on the experience of these veterans and the benefit to the veterans just kind of joining you on those tours?
Many of the individuals that have been on the ride that have served are there to share their experience and build those bonds. In some cases, they're perhaps maybe on their journey to recovery. And this is something that they wanted to participate in to, just to expand, their environment and their community. Because oftentimes it's that retreat and withdrawal from socialization that is, the first thing to kind of happen as we just start to withdraw and self-isolate. But what I'm finding is that, again, it brings the individuals out of these shells, if you will. And many of the individuals that I've met that were struggling initially and, maybe struggled on the ride for certain reasons, have come home and engaged with Wounded Warriors Canada's programming to continue on that journey of recovery and healing, and or just engaged in other means of recovery. It may not be a Wounded Warriors Canada program, but it may just be reaching out and having conversations that they were uncomfortable having previously. So I really do see it's acted as a gateway in many cases for individuals to open up and recognize their own struggles. One of our ambassadors who was a vet in the Balkans is now active with York Regional Police. He said it so eloquently. He said, "You just don't know what you don't know." And until you start having those conversations, you don't know that it isn't, it's not the other guy. It's maybe you. And so these are things that I believe have had a positive impact on our participants, especially the veteran and first responder community that may be struggling.
You talked a little bit about the people being on the ride, sharing their stories and experiencing it in different ways. But last year when I was with you all, I was able to listen to former first responders or police officers and military veterans tell their own stories. And I would have to say that, anybody listening that's interested, I think that you guys have done a fantastic job with your social media, and the stories are available on the Battlefield Bike Ride Instagram page, for example. People can go listen to them, and they are impactful. But I guess my question to you would be, if there is somebody out there listening or thinking that, they're on the edge of getting help, is there any any way that they can engage with Wounded Warriors in order to seek the attention that they might need?
For anyone who might be new to Wounded Warriors Canada as an organization, all of our mental health services are actually offered at no cost to the participant. So, that's regardless of where they reside. We work to remove the barriers to care for that individual so that they receive the support that they need. And the easiest way to do that is just either reach out to woundedwarriors.ca. All of our contact information is there. And, it really is dependent upon where the individual is along their continuum of care, and oftentimes, as we say within the organization, we're in this together because there's no one solution, no one program, no one organization, no one level of government is going to be able to solve this problem and provide the support that is needed. It requires a group effort. So, we're an organization that if we don't have the ability to support, we're going to direct you to, the appropriate channels.
I think that's so important. And I think it's amazing that you don't let people fall through the cracks and you find a way to get people help if they need it.
I believe that has been one of our successes is that we're able to fill the gaps in care for those that we serve. We readily listen to and speak to our communities, and they have really guided us on the programming that we offer. Whether it be the fact that, our surviving family program started as a surviving spouse program because there was that community that was not being supported in an appropriate manner, using, culturally sensitive language and understanding, which is something that we have been able to build as an organization over the course of the last 10 years in the mental health space. So that is something that allows us to really do the best we can for those that we serve. And, one of the things that we also quickly realized is trauma is trauma. It really doesn't matter where it happens. You mentioned, Ryan, some people, served in Afghanistan. We have veterans that were boots on the ground, and we have some that were not. That does not, diminish any traumatic experiences that they may have, faced and experienced. Much like, that trauma on the field of battle is no different to an individual's, thinking and brain than a domestic violence. It's trauma. General Dallaire put it so perfectly. It's an honorable injury. It is something that has happened to you in the execution of your duties, which, was of the service of your, community. It is an honorable injury and something that should be approached as such, and not something that there should be a stigma attached to. And that's something that we readily share as well.
Sometimes there's a big barrier to people seeking help because, first is, there's a soldier mentalities. You don't take a knee, or maybe asking for help is a weakness. In my mind, a struggle is a struggle, and it takes a lot of courage to actually ask for help. And I'm kind of reflecting on my own experience. I had something happen, a couple of years ago where I ended up doing CPR on a gentleman about my age and had some kids, and we weren't able to revive him. And it was a pretty, difficult situation. And after that, I found myself having a bit of a trauma response to it. And I really struggled because I'm like, this isn't trauma. Stuff my buddies went through in Afghanistan, that's trauma. And I was actually repressing that part of me when in reality, that was trauma. And I needed to get some help for that. And it was a good friend of mine who was an ER doctor. And he said that, he's like, trauma's trauma. And it's not for you to measure or to judge it. What you have and what you experience, that is worthy. And if you're feeling or struggling with anyone, it is really important to reach out. And that experience you're having is your experience, and that's okay. And so I really, really appreciate you highlighting that, because I know a lot of my friends who served overseas very reluctant to get help because they don't think they should be struggling. But if you are, you are, and that's okay.
Perhaps I'll maybe share, my own personal story from 2015 and the liberation of the Netherlands. After multiple days of, being at Vimy Ridge and, being in Ypres and going to Tynecott and visiting and seeing all the names, all of the memorials and all of the crosses and all of the headstones, we were departing Bergen-op-Zoom in the Netherlands, just off the Scheldt Estuary. And for those that are, not aware of it, but there's Bergen-op-Zoom 1 and there's Bergen-op-Zoom 2. And the main body of the Canadian forces resides in Bergen-op-Zoom 1, to my understanding, if I recall correctly. And we had just left Bergen-op-Zoom 1 and we're cycling through an incredible forested area, and about 100 meters of road, it opened up to Bergen-op-Zoom 2. And for me, that was a little too much after all of the days that we'd been on the ride to be able to emotionally manage. And I got a little angry with myself, and one of our veterans, who actually happens to be the founder of one of our initial mental health program, COPE, Chris Linford, came up on me and he said, "Steve, what's going on?" I said, I'm so angry right now because there's someone back home that doesn't appreciate and show the respect to someone who deserves it. They don't recognize the freedom that they have. And I don't truly believe that they appreciate the cost. And what I was struggling with was I didn't feel that I had the right to feel that way because I did not serve. Who am I to feel that way? So, and Chris was very eloquent and very, sensitive to what I was going through, and said, "Look, Steve, you've obviously, experienced something in your life, and it's okay to feel this way. Don't run away from it. Own it. We don't have to say anything. I'm just going to ride with you for a little bit. And you just know that I'm here for you." And, a few short, kilometers later, we rode past a house where we just happened to see 2 donkeys having a fun time, if you will, and just completely broke where my head was at. The distraction allowed me to really kind of thank Chris for the tool that he provided me at that time, and the support. And that was really when I said, okay, enough's enough. You guys aren't getting rid of me at the end of this ride. I'm here for the duration.
I think this is why Wounded Warriors, and specifically the bike ride, to me seems so important. And I know I haven't been on a bike ride, but when you have maybe veterans that are reluctant to engage in services, but they're getting that camaraderie experience. They're with people, they're going, and they're being exposed to potentially what else is available. I think you said it earlier, is that, the bike ride is kind of an entry into this work. And I think that's so important to highlight, is the importance of connecting with one another. And I hear that's, what Wounded Warriors, probably at the core of what Wounded Warriors really is helping people connect with one another and then process their experiences.
We're talking about people that have served in one capacity or another. And one thing that is blatantly clear to me with this community is, just because they hang up the uniform, they don't stop serving. And they're there to support, their brothers and sisters. They're there to, work in other community initiatives. They're constantly serving. And, it is, great that we have, bike rides, golf tournaments, and other events. But it's our ambassadors across the country as well that have the opportunity to engage in local associations and legions and share the message of what Wounded Warriors Canada does as an organization, and start those conversations. Often it's, I had a conversation with a gentleman today from Saskatchewan who really was not aware of Wounded Warriors Canada and what we did. So often people recognize us for our name and our brand because we support our veterans and first responders, which is fabulous. But even our veterans and first responders don't necessarily know to the level that we do support them and what our programs do for them. So that's something that we've been able to really kind of build on and share. We have a woman who is an ambassador of ours now. She signed up to participate in the Highway of Heroes bike ride, which is the first ride we had domestically, which is now transitioned into the National Ride for Mental Health. And she was at our opening ceremony and was, hard. It was hard for her to even enter the building where the registration was. She eventually made her way in and has now successfully completed, a few of our programs and is an incredible ambassador for Wounded Warriors Canada. And her story has been shared on our YouTube channel and on our website. And she's just a fabulous individual. And that's really how this community has grown. Being a national organization centered out of Whitby, it's really hard to be able to, reach everybody and be everywhere. And the Battlefield Bike Ride has really been our great, stone in the pond, if you will, because each year we have the opportunity to engage with 100 Canadians to share with them what it is that we're doing as an organization and remind them of the sacrifice of our veteran community and those that are still serving. So that has just been something that has echoed. A rider will then go back and create their own fundraiser or reach out to a friend who might be struggling and say, hey, did you know about this organization? Or I really think you should reach out. It happens so often positively that it has really allowed us to grow exponentially, I believe, because we really just don't have boots on the ground in every community. So it is the participants of the ride that go back and act as our ambassadors, whether they're an ambassador in name or just in the way that they approach raising awareness for us as an organization.
The work that Wounded Warriors is doing is just phenomenal. And I so appreciate what it's doing and how it's evolved, because I've seen it evolve tremendously, the services that you've offered over the years. For those who want to find out more information about Wounded Warriors, where would they go?
woundedwarriors.ca. And that's the easiest way to go about it. As far as the Battlefield Bike Ride, it's bbrseries.ca. This year's ride is sold out, but for anyone who didn't get to register, I hope you follow along. There will be a lot shared on social media, stories, the sites that we're visiting, and perhaps maybe you might be able to make your own pilgrimage at some point to visit those sites. But, for those that are, sad for missing out, next year in 2026, we are going to be concentrating ourselves basically in the Zone Rouge, which is Flanders, and really focusing on the events that took place on in and around Ypres, Passchendaele, and the surrounding territory.
This has been amazing to hear everything that you're doing, to hear about the Battlefield tour that you both went on and the experiences that come along with that. And I hope our listeners can get on that tour in the future.
If anyone would like further information, feel free to contact me directly. And my email address is steve@woundedwarriors.ca.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Story Behind the Stone is available on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on the Reach Across America radio network, on iHeartRadio, Audacity, and TuneIn. Just search for Wreath. We air every Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern on the Reach Across Radio Network. Thank you for tuning in.